You hurt this girl.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did. You hurt that girl.
I didn't do anything.
You're lying. You hurt that girl.
No, I didn't.
Sure it did, and that's why you're having this massive meltdown right now. Because you can't live with yourself, can you?
In hindsight, it's clear that this was the killer's way of maintaining power over his interrogators while also avoiding self-incrimination. Even when the detectives became furious and demanded answers, Stephen kept his composure and continued to give short responses.
When the call came in to the Bibb County dispatcher, a panicked male voice, breathless, stammering, reported something horrifying outside his apartment complex. There's a body, he said, struggling to catch his breath. It looks like a human body, in the trash can. The caller identified himself as Stephen McDaniel, a local law school graduate. On the phone, his voice carried shock, fear, disbelief. He sounded like a neighbor horrified at what he had stumbled across. The dispatcher pressed him for details, but his answers were fragmented, trembling. Something terrible had been found at the Barristers Hall apartments, and the police were already on their way. Officers arrived within minutes, their boots crunching over gravel as they approached the row of dumpsters behind the red-bricked apartment building. The stench hit them before they lifted the lid. When they did, the nightmare was confirmed. Inside lay a human torso. Interviewed that day by reporters was Stephen McDaniel himself. His curly hair stuck out in tufts, his glasses glinting with disbelief. The victim in the dumpster was indeed Lauren Giddings, the bright, called 911, who had spoken on camera. As a concerned neighbor, would soon be revealed as her killer. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born in 1984 in Laurel, Maryland, the first of 3 daughters. From a young age, she radiated warmth. Quick to smile, quick to comfort, always the steady presence among her sisters. Friends would later describe her as someone who simply made people feel safe. She had a calm confidence that drew others to her, the kind of girl you could trust with secrets and lean on in hard times. Her childhood was filled with sports, laughter, and an early sense of justice. Teachers noticed that Lauren had a sharp mind, one that balanced intellect with empathy. While other kids her age might daydream about fame or fortune, Lauren often talked about wanting to help people. She was the type to stick up for classmates being bullied, to listen when someone needed to be heard. In college at Agnes Scott, a women's liberal arts school in Decatur, Georgia, Lauren's sense of purpose crystallized. She threw herself into academics, excelling in political science and finding her voice in debates. But it wasn't just books and classrooms. Lauren had a lively spirit. She loved being around people, and her friends remembered her as both brilliant and funny, the kind of person who could light up a room. By the time she decided to pursue law, nobody was surprised. She wanted to make a difference, to stand for people who didn't have a voice. Law school at Mercer University in Macon was her next step, and she attacked it with the same determination that had defined her since childhood. It was at Mercer that Lauren truly came into her own. Professors admired her discipline, classmates leaned on her kindness, and she carved a space as both leader and friend. She wasn't chasing wealth or prestige. Her dream was to be a public defender, to fight for those society often overlooked. Still, law school was grueling. The long nights of studying, the endless exams, the mental pressure of preparing for the bar, it took a toll on everyone. Lauren, however, approached it with resilience. Her close friends remembered how she kept them all grounded, organizing study groups, checking in on those who were falling behind, encouraging them with her mix of warmth and steel. By June of 2011, Lauren was standing on the threshold of everything she'd worked for. She had graduated from Mercer. Her bar exam was just weeks away. The future she had dreamed of since she was a child was right there, within reach. Nobody could have guessed that her bright journey was about to be cut short by someone who had lived just feet away, watching her, waiting. Late June in Macon was heavy with heat, the kind that clung to the skin and pressed down on the city like a weight. For most graduates at Mercer Law, it was a season of nerves and hope. Bar exam prep, new job applications, dreams of what came next. Lauren had been pouring herself into study sessions, building outlines, meeting with classmates, and pushing through the exhaustion with the quiet resolve she was known for. On the night of June 25, 2011, she sent out what would be her last emails. She had been in touch with her boyfriend, David Vandiver, who lived out of town. They had been together for 3 years, long distance but committed, with plans for a future that stretched past law school stress. Lauren wrote about how exhausted she was, how ready she was to take the bar and finally move forward. She told him she loved him. The next day, June 26th, the apartment complex where Lauren lived, Barrister's Hall, was quiet. Neighbors went about their business, the heat driving most people indoors. Lauren, who usually checked in with friends or showed up to study groups, seemed to vanish into silence. That on June 27th and 28th, calls to her phone went unanswered. Friends texted her, left voicemails, sent Facebook messages. David grew worried. 2. Lauren wasn't the type to go dark. She was responsible, responsive, and always let people know if she was overwhelmed. By the 29th, the anxiety had thickened into dread. Several of Lauren's law school friends decided to stop by her apartment. They knocked on her door, called her name. No answer. The door was locked, and nothing seemed out of place from the outside. But a sick feeling settled in the pit of their stomachs. That night, David called one of Lauren's closest friends, Ashley, begging her to check again. By the morning of June 30th, the circle of worry had grown too wide. Someone needed to act. Among the concerned was Stephen McDaniel, a classmate and neighbor who lived just across the hall. He joined the group of friends who were trying to piece together where Lauren had gone. Outwardly, he seemed nervous and shaken, volunteering to help search, asking questions, lingering with the group. By the afternoon, the police had been called, and a missing person report was filed. Officers checked the apartment. There were no signs of forced entry. Her purse, keys, and phone were all inside. Lauren hadn't left voluntarily. It was as if she had simply vanished. Then came June 30th's searing revelation. As friends, neighbors, and reporters gathered around Barrister's Hall, police began searching outside. The sickening smell hit them first. Behind the complex, in the dumpsters lined up for trash day, a discovery was made that stopped hearts cold. A human torso, wrapped and concealed, badly decomposed but unmistakably human. The fear that had haunted Lauren's friends hardened into grief. The missing person case had become a homicide, and as detectives looked closer at the scene, one face in particular stood out among the crowd. Stephen McDaniel, the concerned neighbor, whose behavior was about to unravel under the weight of suspicion. Stephen Mark McDaniel had always been a strange presence, the kind of person classmates noticed but didn't quite understand. Born in 1985, he grew up in Lilburn, Georgia, the son of a quiet, middle-class family. On paper, he was bright, sharp enough to make it into Mercer's law program, capable of keeping up academically. But in person, he was awkward, socially stunted, and unnerving. By the time he reached Mercer, his classmates had formed impressions quickly. Stephen kept to himself, speaking in a monotone voice, rarely making eye contact. He wasn't funny, he wasn't warm, and he never seemed to connect. While others joked around in study groups or relaxed at parties, Stephen hovered on the edges, stiff, with a peculiar energy that put people on edge. His politics leaned extreme. He spoke often about libertarianism and militias, with an almost obsessive interest in survivalism. He owned a stash of weapons, guns, knives, even a samurai sword, and liked to talk about being prepared for collapse, about defending himself when society fell apart. Most dismissed it as eccentric posturing, but it left others uneasy. He also had a streak of resentment simmering beneath the surface. Classmates remembered his bitter comments about women, about relationships, about being overlooked. He was the kind of man who nursed grievances quietly, letting them harden inside him until they warped into something darker. When it came to women, Stephen seemed invisible to most, yet his interest in them was hardly absent. In fact, it was consuming. Beneath the surface, he was obsessed, most of all with Lauren Giddings, who lived just a few feet away in the same apartment building. Lauren, with her kindness and charisma, represented everything Stephen lacked. She was admired, loved, surrounded by friends. She was successful, confident, radiant. To someone like Stephen, who seethed with loneliness and inadequacy, she became a fixation. He watched her from his apartment. He studied her routines. And eventually, his obsession grew into something far more sinister. Unbeknownst to anyone, Stephen had been secretly spying on her apartment before the murder, stealing small items, and familiarizing himself with the layout. He had watched her in her most private moments, blurring the line between fantasy and reality until his delusion turned deadly when Lauren vanished. Stephen wasn't just another concerned neighbor. He was the predator hiding in plain sight. And when cameras caught him speaking to reporters about her disappearance, his mask began to slip. As the news of the torso spread through Macon, the apartment complex was buzzing with police, neighbors, and reporters. The cameras were everywhere, capturing reactions from Lauren's classmates and residents who couldn't believe the horror unfolding in their own backyard. Among them was Stephen McDaniel. A reporter from WGXA News approached him. At first glance, he looked like any other concerned neighbor, a thin young man with frizzy hair and oversized glasses, wearing a plain shirt, standing nervously before the microphone. His tone was flat but cooperative as he described Lauren as a good person and said everyone was worried. But then came the moment. Midway through the interview, the reporter, almost casually, delivered the breaking news. Police had just confirmed a body had been found in the dumpster outside. The change in Stephen was immediate and chilling. His face froze, eyes widening like a trapped animal. His lips parted, but no words came out. He stood there for several agonizing seconds, visibly rattled, his breathing changing. The reporter tried to continue, asking how he felt about this revelation, but Stephen stammered and cut himself off. I think I need to sit down. He abruptly ended the interview and shuffled away, leaving behind an eerie silence that those watching at home. The reaction was unforgettable. Some saw a man in shock, too overwhelmed to continue. Others saw something. At first, he tried to maintain the facade of being helpful. He joined the search groups, asked questions about the case, lingered near detectives. But his awkward mannerisms, combined with the odd behavior caught on camera, made him stand out. Then came the knock at his apartment door. Detectives wanted to talk. Inside, what they found would shift suspicion into certainty. When investigators first brought Stephen in for questioning, it wasn't in a harsh or accusatory way. At that point, Lauren's case had only just shifted from missing person to confirmed homicide, and everyone who knew her, even casually, was being spoken to. Stephen entered the interview room with the same flat, emotionless presence people had come to know. Thin frame, glasses slipping down his nose, his voice carrying no rise or fall. But what unsettled detectives was how detached he seemed when speaking about Lauren. He described her in a matter-of-fact way, calling her nice and smart, but his words lacked warmth. When pressed about the last time he'd seen her, his answers grew halting. He couldn't seem to remember details, something that stood out, because Lauren had been his next-door neighbor. He told them he hadn't seen her in a few days, that he'd been at home, that he didn't know anything unusual. Detectives noticed something else, too. He avoided eye contact, and when silence filled the room, he sat unnervingly still, as though waiting for cues on how to respond. There were no tears, no visible anxiety about his missing neighbor, just flat, robotic replies that rang hollow. The questions turned sharper. Had he ever been in Lauren's apartment? No. Had he noticed anything unusual? No. Had he seen or heard anything in the days she vanished? No. But when detectives asked if he would give consent for them to look through his apartment, Stephen hesitated. His voice cracked slightly as he asked, "Why would you need to?" The hesitation was enough. Detectives secured a search warrant. The following day, investigators entered Stephen McDaniel's apartment. The moment they stepped inside, the smell hit them, an odor of decay, sweat, and something rancid. The tiny space was cluttered, unkempt, and oppressive. And in the midst of it all, hidden in corners and tucked away in drawers, were items that tied him directly to Lauren's murder. The search warrant was executed quietly, but word spread fast among the Barristers Hall residents. As Lauren's friends and classmates huddled together outside, praying for answers, investigators crossed the threshold of Stephen McDaniel's small unit. The scene inside was unlike anything they could have anticipated. The air was thick, foul. The apartment itself was a cave of disorder. Dirty dishes stacked high, piles of clutter scattered across the floor, clothes unwashed and crumpled. An aura of neglect that spoke volumes about Stephen's private world. But it wasn't just untidiness they found. It was the trophies on a desk drawer. Officers discovered a pair of pink women's underwear. They didn't belong to anyone who lived there. Nearby, they uncovered more intimate items, small things taken without consent, quietly hoarded. When detectives matched them to Lauren, the picture of voyeurism became undeniable. In another drawer, they found a black ski mask and a pair of gloves. Not the kind used for winter, these were tools of concealment. A chilling prop for someone who had been stalking his neighbor. The most damning discovery, however, was a set of master keys. Keys that gave Stephen access to multiple units in the building, including Lauren's. Detectives realized, with a creeping dread, that he had been entering her apartment long before the night she vanished. Then came the digital search. On his computer, forensic investigators uncovered a disturbing collection of material. Violent pornography, searches for how to commit crimes, and most unsettling of all, writings that revealed a twisted fixation on Lauren herself. When confronted with the evidence, Stephen tried to retreat behind silence. He invoked his right to counsel, shutting down interviews, retreating into the same stone-faced stillness he had shown before. But the walls were closing in. Outside, as news trickled down, Lauren's friends were shattered. Their grief, raw and unbearable, was compounded by the realization that the killer wasn't some shadowy figure who had come and gone, but the quiet, awkward neighbor who had lived right across the hall. The man who had joined their search. The man who had called 911. The man who had stood in front of cameras, pretending to care. The mask had slipped, and what lay beneath was monstrous. Asterisk as the weeks unfolded after the grisly discovery, the case against Stephen McDaniel grew tighter by the day. Detectives pieced together Lauren's final hours with chilling clarity. Autopsy results confirmed what many had feared. She had been strangled. The dismemberment had come afterward, a gruesome attempt to conceal the crime. The timeline painted a haunting picture. In the late hours of June 25th or early morning of June 26th, Stephen had slipped into Lauren's apartment using the master key he had stolen. He attacked her as she slept, overpowering her with a sudden, brutal grip around her throat. Once she was gone, he dragged her body back into his own apartment, where he dismembered her with a hacksaw. Then, piece by piece, he tried to dispose of her remains in the dumpsters outside, banking on the anonymity of trash collection to erase his crime. But the plan faltered. Lauren's torso remained, discovered just before garbage pickup could take it away forever. The gruesome fate of the rest of her body was never fully recovered. For prosecutors, the evidence was devastating. The stolen underwear, the master keys, the masks and gloves, all were physical proof. The writings on his computer revealed his fantasy life, steeped in violence and domination. And then there was his own bizarre behavior, robotic interviews, his collapse on camera, his inability to maintain the veneer of innocence. When the case moved to court, Stephen's defense tried to cast doubt, arguing about circumstantial links, questioning forensic interpretations. But the shadow of his obsession loomed large. Witnesses testified about his oddness, his fixation, his resentment. The jury didn't see a misunderstood loner. They saw a predator. And then came the bombshell. Before the trial could spiral into a drawn-out spectacle, Stephen stunned the courtroom with a plea deal. In 2014, he stood before the judge and admitted to what everyone had feared. He killed Lauren Giddings in a flat, unemotional voice. He described breaking into her apartment, strangling her, and dismembering her body. He offered no motive beyond a vague, chilling admission of desire and compulsion. It was the final unmasking. Hearing from his own lips what the evidence had already screamed, the judge sentenced him to life in prison. No possibility of parole until decades had passed. For Lauren's family and friends, it was justice, but it was hollow. Nothing could bring back the vibrant, compassionate young woman whose life had been stolen. The community, too, was left scarred. For months, Macon had been consumed by fear and grief, and now by the chilling realization that a killer had lived. Among them, blending in with awkward smiles and monotone interviews. The betrayal ran deep, and as Stephen was led away in shackles, Lauren's loved ones were left with a truth both devastating and eternal. Her dreams of defending the vulnerable, of building a life with David, of a future filled with laughter and love, were all silenced in one night by the man across the hall. *** For Lauren's family, the verdict did little to soothe the ache. Her parents, Bill and Karen, sat through every hearing, clutching each other's hands, watching the young man who had stolen their daughter's life speak with no visible remorse. They had raised Lauren to be compassionate, driven, and strong. Now, they were left only with memories. Her sisters, Caitlin and Sarah, wept openly when Stephen's flat voice described the night of the murder. It was surreal, like listening to a monster narrate the destruction of their world. But even in grief, they chose to honor Lauren's spirit. The Giddings family established scholarships in her name, ensuring that other young women pursuing law could continue the journey Lauren never finished. At Mercer Law, her classmates created tributes, candles, photos, and written remembrances taped to the walls of the lecture halls where she had once studied. Professors spoke of her brilliance, her kindness, her future that now belonged only to imagination. Her boyfriend, David, was shattered. He had spoken to Lauren just hours before her death. They had shared dreams of marriage, of a future together. Now he was left with unanswered messages, the unbearable silence of a phone that would never light up with her name again. Years later, he admitted he struggled to reconcile the love he carried with the cruelty of her ending. In the wider world, Lauren's story became part of the true crime tapestry. Documentaries and news specials dissected the details: the creepy 911 call, the viral TV interview, the neighbor-turned-killer. Online sleuths revisited every frame of Stephen's on-camera breakdown, pointing out the instant where shock seemed to blur into guilt. For many, it became a chilling lesson: predators don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they live right across the hall. And Stephen himself? He faded into the prison system, serving his life sentence in near anonymity. Reports described him as quiet, withdrawn, no longer the center of attention, swallowed by the gray monotony of incarceration. His fantasy of control, of power, of dominance had dissolved into a cell where the lights never dimmed and freedom was gone forever. For those who knew Lauren, though, her story was never defined by her killer. It was defined by her laughter, her warmth, her determination to fight for others. Her life was the real story. The crime was only the brutal interruption. And in the end, that is what people carry: the memory of a young woman who should have walked into a bright career, who should have passed the bar, who should have built a family and a future. Instead, her life stands as both inspiration and warning: the light of who she was, and the darkness of the man who believed he could take it away.